All right, let's review block 2. We're going to open up with a heels elevated front squat in our team practice 1. Now, heels elevated front squat is an exercise that will leverage a slant board and will leverage a anterior load, right? So barbell in front, slant board underneath feet. And what the biggest thing to think about with this is we're going to do a hypertrophy block. The rep scheme is going to be 8, 6, 4, 4, 6, 8. A lot of volume. And then we're going to put a tempo in there, 2-4 XO tempo, so a lot of time under tension. So what we're thinking is what exercises can we choose that's auto-regulatory and pretty much a high governor to now put us in a position that we can't get the full benefit of that exercise, right? So we're thinking, hey, I want to get a lot of range of motion and I want to maintain a position throughout the entirety of that movement that places stress in the right area. One of the big examples of this would be a heels elevated front squat, right? So the anterior load, what that does, it gives me some sort of anterior kind of positioning to adjust, which pulls my torso more vertical. Now, that's a great mechanism to create stress on the quad. Why? Because that center of mass is now back, and I have to compensate by pushing my knees forward and sitting my butt straight down. And this keeps that stress on the middle of that quad. The other part of that is the slant board. So a large part of that limiting factor of I can only go so far forward until I fill some sort of block, that slant board will facilitate a really more upright position, more knee forward position, more tension in that quad. So when we get to the bottom, we feel a lot of tension there. So heels elevated front squat, think quad, think loading up the tissues in that front part of the leg, thinking about what can we choose from an exercise selection combined with the set, rep, and tempo to get the most from that exercise. Heels elevated front squat's our first exercise. With practice 2, we're going to utilize a chin up or a supinated grip position. And now why on that, relatively speaking, to a pronated or a neutral? We like to rotate our grips. What that does for us is gives us a slightly different stimulus, right? So if we're going to go neutral grip, we have a lot of mechanical advantage. It's a good position for my shoulder to go through full flexion. Pronated grip, we are mechanically less advantaged, so we have a lesser capacity to get as much weight or go through as much volume. And then with a semi-supinated or supinated grip, this chin-up grip, we'll be able to use other muscle groups, specifically the flexor of the elbow, the biceps. So we'll see a little bit more recruitment there. Now again, we're going to use the same protocol we're using with practice 1, that 8-6-4, 4-6-8, lot of overall volume, and then we're going to use that 2-4 XO tempo, a lot of time under tension. So we want to use an exercise that's going to have as much potential to externally load, because one of the things that we can't do with relative strength exercises like a push-up or a pull-up or a chin-up in this case is I can't just toggle the weight like that. Right? I have to have a mechanism to use exercise variations that I'm mechanically stronger, or I can leverage more muscle groups to go through that much volume. Now, when we're thinking about pulling, the other thought is, okay, now I'm holding in this isometric position. A lot of times we get neutral grip or we get even a pronated grip. It's really hard, unless we're using an external implement like a pull down, a lat pull down, to really engage the lats and pull back. So what that supinated grip position does is, one, it gets me into a supinated position to form, which will allow for a more flex position, right? We go through this a lot with our cars. And then 2, I can recruit that bicep. So I'm holding here not only with just my lats, maybe my rear delt, my teres minor, all the retractors of the shoulder, but more my bicep. Point being, translation is we're going to use a variation like a chin-up grip to get more from that exercise than we would if we're going to go a pronated grip, right? And that's the combination of now we're merging a lot of these protocols and the other component with what I could be successful with from an exercise selection standpoint. So chin up is going to be the big focal point in this one, right? And we'll have an option of, if you can't do 8-6-4, 4-6-8, we'll be able to go 4-3-2, 2-3-4. Right, so we have another option for you to load up, so not just locking in on if you can't do 8, you're screwed. If you can't do 8, we have another option that you can go through, but the same mechanism. Time under tension, volume, pushing yourself, leveraging our tools at our disposal to get the most from the exercise. So our last workout in team is going to be trap bar deadlift. So we should be really familiar with trap bar deadlift. And there's a notion that this isn't really a deadlift, it's more of a what they call a squat lift, right? Meaning that we're bending the knee to get into this hinge position. And that's probably a more accurate description, right? We talk a lot about our RDL or dumbbell RDL or single leg RDL, anything where we're really truly hinging, which is more of an isolation exercise for that hip than anything as a true hip dominant posterior chain exercise. Alternatively, when we look at a deadlift, the end point is going to be the ground, and we have our end range, and we're going to be more mechanically advantaged if we bend the knee and use a little bit more of the anterior part of our leg, at least concentrically, or we're always mechanically weaker. So we're thinking about a trap bar deadlift. You want to think about it, it's a lot of posterior chain, and we're going to accommodate that by getting a little bit more knee dominant and hip dominant work throughout the training block. So you'll see in practice 3, we're going to do a windmill variation, focusing on hip abduction and hinging. So it's going to get a little bit more glute, a little bit more hamstring. To compensate for, we're going to do a lot of knee dominant stuff within the workout already. Now, trap bar deadlift, 8, 6, 4, 4, 6, 8 in terms of volume or sets and reps, and then 2, 4 exo tempo. Now, that tempo is going to be holding the contracted position, which in this case is going to be that hip flex position, but we're going to be resting on the ground. Now, what we're trying to do is reinforce that position off the ground. So when I set and pull, we want that first rep all the way through to the 8th rep to be locked in, head to toe, strong as steel. So we're pulling with a stable, strong, flat back every single rep. And we want to encourage first rep to last rep locked in from the complete start to end of that rep. Now, when we're going through and getting heavier and heavier and heavier, that's going to have a big impact on your technique from that what we call first pull. So that first ascent, when we're lifting away from the ground, that 1 inch mark, we really need to be conscious of stabilizing, maintaining your breath, pushing the ground down, pulling my shoulders to the ceiling above all else. So if I'm struggling off the floor, lock in your breath, maintain your position, drive up from the ground to get a really steady, stable position. All right, so that is team. We're going to move on to strength. We're now moving into strength. Block number 2. The rep scheme is going to be a paler descending. We're going to go 6, 6, 6, 4, 4, 4. So 6 total sets, having a weight change on my 4th set, going from that last set of 6 to that first set of 4. Remember, the weight goes up when the reps go down. So we're going to leverage getting acclimated to a load, the first 3 sets of 6, and then transitioning into a heavier load, because we should be quote unquote potentiated, we should be locked in from a warm-up perspective, we should be locked in from a motor unit recruitment perspective. Now we can parlay this into a heavier weight. Now, when we're setting up, you want to think about the exercise and the relative load that we can be successful with for 6 sets and individual rep scheme. We're going to use a 2-4 exo tempo in this one. So again, what can I recover from the bottom position? Practice 1, A1 is going to be a front foot elevated split squat. 2 blocks. Setting up, we're on train track, so feet are not on tight ropes, but we're on this train track, so hip width apart. From here, we want to be long with our stance so I can get all of my weight in the front foot, keeping my chest up, and that back leg as far away from the ground as I possibly can, or as extended as we can. Now, that loading, 6, 6, 6, that's going to be a moderate weight. So holding 2 dumbbells, load to that bottom position, hold here for 4, 3, 2, 1, pushing down through the block. We see a lot of that block moving, right? We might see a lot of people use that block against the wall or rack. What that's telling us is you're not pushing down, right? As I'm loading here, I'm sliding that foot away and that block is moving because you're pushing away, not pushing down. So we're thinking as we get down to this bottom position, my weight is on the front part of my front heel, right? So this part here, loaded up there so that weight is pushing down. And when I'm recovering, what I want to think about is not pushing back, but pushing down, and my body will move back organically, right? That's the idea, is to try to find the best exercises, the best loading of the muscle tissue that we're trying to target, in this case, the quadricep, and combine that with the best set rep and tempo scheme to get the most from that exercise. So practice 1, 6, 6, 6, 4, 4, 4, 2, 4 exo tempo, front foot elevated split squat, thinking quad, thinking tightrope, going down an escalator as I go down, driving through the front foot's heel, and then pushing down to push myself back up. So now we're going to move on to practice number 2. Practice number 2 is going to be a 3-point stance, so 2 feet, 1 hand on the bench. Dumbbell row, 1 dumbbell here. So biggest thing is our stance. right? A lot of times we see a little bit of premature fatigue or not as much strength because we're just in a bad position. I like to reinforce and bulletproof this position by hinging, right? So just like I was set up on RDL, locking in there, right? So now I'm here, one hand on a bench. If I took away this bench, it should look like I'm in a good hinge position. Knees back, back flat, knees pushed out over the toes. That strong position enables me to pull more weight. So when you're setting up here, dumbbell will be there, just like you would normally do an RDL, hinge at the waist, back flat, chin tucked, prop that hand on the bench, and then grab onto your dumbbell. Once we're here, we're thinking pulling the dumbbell up and back. We're going to utilize a 2-4 exo tempo again here with that 6-6-6, 4-4-4 rep scheme. So as we're loading, you want to pull that elbow up and back, targeting that pinky right around your pocket so it can engage and recruit that lat. Right, we're thinking now we're trying to address that contracted position, so shortened position of that lat by pulling up and back. Because not only does that lat pull down and in, it pulls in towards the midline of your body. So if I pull up and back, now I can recruit there. And we see this a lot of, can I get here or there? It makes a huge difference in the amount of tension you create. So recap, set up good position, good hinge, back flat, chin tucked, hinge position of the lower body, so knees back, shins vertical, butt back behind our heels, strong, stable hand on the bench. Second part is when you grab that dumbbell and you pull, you want to aim for that pinky to your pocket, pulling your elbow past your rib cage, really accentuating that loaded position of the lat. Our last exercise with strength is going to be a kettlebell deadlift. For this example, I'm going to use one kettlebell, but imagine we have two. Now, that's a good loading kind of conversation, right? So we have weights all the way from 4 to 48 kilos. So if you're looking to make a jump from 1 week to the next, we can go with 2 to 2, or potentially go from 2 to 1, right? So for instance, let's say week 1, we use 2 14-kilo kettlebells. Week 2, we want to jump up to 28. We do have a 28-kilo kettlebell. That's a good opportunity to grab that, or we just grab 132. Right, so you make that decision based off of what's available and what you feel comfortable. So as opposed to grabbing 2 16s, you can just grab a 32. Point being, either way, I have 2 dumbbells or 1, it's going to be in between our feet. We want that kettlebell's handle to slice my feet in half. So right now, if I'm looking down, I should look at that kettlebell handle in line with the top of my shoelaces, right? So now I'm looking down at the bell, I'm set up, my feet are about hip width to shoulder width apart, wherever you feel more comfortable, more stable, more balanced. From here, I want to hinge. We want to hinge eccentrically, always. Concentrically or up, depends on our flexibility and our strength. So when I'm setting up, hinge down, butt back, chin tucked. We want to maintain that flat back. Grab onto your kettlebell. Now from here, am I strong enough to pull with that hinge position? Great, pull. If you aren't, we want to lower it down with that maintained hinge position. From here, we bend the knee, we pull with more of that anterior part of our leg, making it more like we talked about with our team, a squat lift. So a little bit more anterior front of the leg to pull back up, and then we hinge back on the way down. We are always going to be stronger eccentrically than we are concentrically, meaning that I can lower it down to the ground with a lot more weight or with a lot less fatigue than I can when I overcome. So as I think about loading this, we want to make our decision what I can do concentrically or lifting up away from the ground, as opposed to our eccentric, we're going to be organically or naturally stronger. Now, with that being said, regardless of the weight that we choose and the impact on that concentric, we're always going down in terms of that hinge mechanic on the way down. So we want to think that the way I go down to the ground is uniform, regardless if I use that hip on the way up or that anterior part of my leg on the way up. That's the biggest thing, is we want to stress what we can stress, getting stronger where we can get stronger, using a weight that we can accommodate that. Now, if we had to choose between a hinge on the way up and down, I'd probably choose a hinge on the way up and down. Choosing a range of motion by adjusting the block height, that's a better strategy. But if we really want to push the weight and get into this, hey, I want to get a really good deadlift, I want to grab both of those 48s, we do have that option. just keep in the back of your mind that we already have a really big stress with that front foot elevated split squat in practice 1. Let's balance that out with practice 3. And then that's the other part. We're gonna have a block, or we're gonna go from the ground, pause on the ground. So setting up wise, we pull down to the ground, 4, 3, 2, 1. And whatever strategy I use, we use the same one on the way down. Okay, that's strength. 4 is gonna be our challenge. We're gonna do a dead hang with our elbow locked, body long from the ground. So the idea is to choose a load based off what I could do in our KPI pull-up. So we're gonna open up, if you can do 10 plus, you're gonna choose 1.5 times your body weight. So if I weigh 200 pounds, I'm gonna add 100 pounds and I'm gonna hold that for as long as I possibly can. If I could do 5 to 10, then I'm gonna use 1.25. So in this case, if I weigh 200 pounds, that'll be 50 pounds. So half of what I would do if I was doing 10. So now I'd be holding a total weight of 250. If I'm under 5 pull-ups for my KPI, you're just gonna hold your body weight for as long as you possibly can. The longest one wins. And that's the goal, is to try to push yourself and challenge yourself and use a load that you feel really challenging to you, but not super impossible. All right, and that's the game this week, or this month, is all about finding way to challenge yourself based off your current strength levels. And the thing that we love about dead hangs is, 1, it's grip. 2, it's gonna really get a good stretch. But 3, it's more mental than anything. And that's the beautiful part about challenges, finding really safe, effective challenges that push you outside your comfort zone, but you know that you can really find ways to get better. And you find that you'll get better over this really quickly. And that's the exciting part. So every week I encourage you to really try to up your time, fight like hell, get a little bit more from each current week. All right, guys, block number 2.